So we're here with Lloyd Blankfein, who has been the chairman and CEO of Goldman Sachs for 10 years. And I don't think any of your predecessors in the last 2 decades stayed that long. Is that right?
No, I don't think they stayed. I'm sure it seemed that long, but they didn't stay that long.
Okay. Well, let's talk about your early life, if we could, for a moment. You grew up in New York City. When you were growing up, you didn't have a lot of money. Was money anything you ever thought about when you were growing up, as wanting to have a lot of money, or what were you interested in when you were a young boy?
I didn't think about money because I went to school with other kids that were like us, and so I just didn't know I didn't know what I mean, I don't know if it would have changed me had I known, but I didn't know what the range of possibilities were. I didn't know that we weren't well-to-do. I didn't know that.
Brooklyn.
I grew up in Brooklyn.
Your father worked, as my father did, in the post office.
No, colleagues.
Right. Mine worked in Baltimore, yours worked in New York, but their job was to file the mail.
Right.
Not to deliver it, but to file it.
Sort the mail.
Sort the mail. All right, so you weren't wealthy, and you went through public schools, but you obviously did pretty well because you were valedictorian of your class in high school. So you always realized you were probably smarter than the average student.
I knew that, ranking high in my school meant that I was, certainly good at school, but I didn't know how smart I was or how I would compare with other things. And by the way, being good at school and being smart are two separate things anyway.
Were you surprised you got into Harvard, and did you ever think of not going because you couldn't afford it or you might not fit in?
Let me just take a step back. Obviously, my parents didn't go to college, but I have one older sibling, didn't go to college either. It wouldn't have occurred to me, really, to apply to that fancier school. I mean, obviously, I had heard of it. I knew I was going to go to college, but I didn't assume I was going to go to. I didn't even know what it would have been to go. I remember reading Separate Peace, and
right.
I guess the kids were at a prep school. I read that whole book. I didn't know what a prep school was.
Well, I didn't know either.
I know what it is now, but I didn't know what those things
right.
were. So it wasn't like I had expectations. I know that no other kid from Thomas Jefferson High School went into the Ivy League that year, but somehow there was some guy from Harvard who was there and spoke to me and encouraged me to apply, and the school waived the application fees and everything. In other words, and I wasn't that spectacular. It wasn't like I had perfect board scores or everything. I don't know what made them want to invest, but they did, and I went there.
When you got there, did you
I got there, and I was grateful for it.
All right, but when you got there, did you say, these kids are smarter than me, or you said, these kids aren't as smart as me?
I didn't get to the smart versus not smart. I had to get over the idea that we were from different planets. Okay. First thing I did when I got accepted to college, when my parents took me to something called the Mail Shop on Ralph Avenue in Brooklyn, where they bought me, it must have been like for $40, 3 sports jackets, 5 pairs of slacks, burnt orange right. pants with a light blue double-breasted jacket, the kind of thing, circa, I wouldn't say that I fit the demographic, but when I got to Harvard, circa 1971, I'm sure my roommates from New England prep school community looked at me like I was from some foreign planet, and I could tell that look. I was nuanced enough to tell that they were looking at me like I was some different species.
So what did you do at Harvard? Were you an athlete, or were you a scholar?
I was a swimmer in high school. I could never have been good in college, but even if I was good in high school in New York City, but I went there. I tried to do that. I wasn't going to be any good.
But you did not try out for the swimming team?
Oh, I did.
I thought one time I heard you say that you were still swimming when the others
No, I did. I was
off.
I was not built for speed. You could take one look and see that. I felt I was more built for endurance. I did this longish kind of race, and we're swimming, and meanwhile the other kids who started with me were out, showered, and back in class before I'd finished swimming. So I literally went. I don't even think I dried off. Right. I went from there to the boathouse to try another sport.
When did you decide you wanted to be a lawyer, or at least go to law school?
When I started school at Harvard, I was 16. I turned 17 when I was there. So in addition to being provincial, I was also young. And by the time I sorted things out, I was pre-med for a while. I took some science course wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I toyed with the idea of being an academic. I was a good student. I wasn't that good a student. And I also dawned on me at some point that I need to pay off student loans and earn a living. So I thought I'd be a professional. I applied to law school, and a lot of people just walked down the block from college and went to law school. I didn't take any time off in between, so I went to Harvard Law School.
You went to New York law firms right afterwards?
I applied to New York law firms. I got job offers at some, and I didn't get job offers at others.
Okay, but you wound up at Donovan Leisure?
There was another firm that hired me first, which was, and I accepted a job in the tax department. This was a famous, top-notch New York law firm. In their tax department, I got a call from them after I'd accepted the job and some months had gone by, And they called me up and said, you know, we're going to move you, we've overhired for the tax department, we're going to move you to the corporate department.
Right.
And I said, well, I've taken all these tax courses, I kind of want to be a tax lawyer. He goes, well, we've overhired and we don't have a slot for you, but corporate law is fine. He said, well, do me a favor, tell me, how many slots do you have? And they said, 4. I said, well, how many people did you hire for tax? And they said, 5. So I said, well, let me get this straight. So I'm 5th on your list of 4 people for this job. Is that right? Well, we don't look at it that way, but so I said, look, I can't come and work for you. So there was another firm that I had also liked that I originally didn't sign up with. That was Donovan Leisure, so I went there.
You went there, and did you practice tax law?
I did. I got thrown onto cases. They were very interesting cases involving the entertainment industry, and so I moved for 2 years out to California. It was kind of a nice lifestyle. I lived in L.A.
Wow.
Worked
so
out.
Were you wearing leisure suits or not?
No, at that
there?
point, no. In fact, everybody else in California was wearing, loincloths and togas, and I was stepping over them on a Saturday morning in a 3-piece suit on my way to the office.
Okay.
So I realized I was a little bit out of sync for the lifestyle of California as a corporate lawyer.
Now, I practiced law as well, and your career was probably better than mine. I wasn't a good lawyer, and my clients made that clear. Your clients presumably thought you were good at it, but why did you think you wanted to leave? And you tried to apply
Actually, a number of my friends were going to finance jobs, and at that point, it wasn't the be-all and end-all. There was no thought you'd make more money. In fact, the job I took eventually paid less money than what I was making at that point. I was a 5th-year associate in a law firm, and I was going to be starting over at another firm. So I applied to a few Wall Street firms. I didn't know a lot about them, but I remember I had a job interview at Morgan Stanley. Dean Witter at that time was a separate firm. Goldman Sachs was one of them, but I got turned down by all of them, and probably for good reason. I didn't know very much about it. A lot of people were coming out. There's no reason to grab onto me. Ultimately, I joined J. Aaron. It may have actually been acquired by Goldman or was about to be acquired by Goldman, but it was a separate company and managed separately. And eventually, as a result of joining J. Aaron, I started getting integrated into the Goldman Sachs firm.
Did you ever meet, and have you ever met the person who turned you down at Goldman?
I knew who it was, and it was...
That person's still here?
No, this is 35, 37, 36 years ago. For many years after I got to J. Aaron / Goldman Sachs, there would be no one threatened by having by being at odds with me.
Okay.
It took me a while to work my way up the letterhead.
Did you feel like you were ready to be the CEO of Goldman Sachs?
Look, I never felt like I was ready to be the CEO. I've been the CEO for 10 years. I'm not sure I feel ready to be the CEO of Goldman Sachs.
Wound up as the vice chairman of Goldman Sachs.
Well, you know,
it took a number of years.
It may have been a blink looking back, but while I was living through it, it wasn't so quick. I got more involved in the equity business, got in charge of sales and trading, and then over time, I became a vice chairman of the firm, one of several, but my particular coverage was over all the sales and trading businesses at that time.
But trading businesses are ones where you can lose a lot of money very quickly, so you were always, I assume, worried about all the people under you making a big mistake, and how did you monitor that?
It was good training for the job I'm in now. I spend 99% of my time worrying about the 1% things that could go wrong, and so being pretty, paranoid. I managed it. It leveraged two things that are normally not virtues, but are in this context. It leveraged my my ADD and my paranoia.
So when you became vice chairman, you were under Hank Paulson, who was the CEO. He seemed to like it and said he was never going to go into government. And then George W. Bush eventually persuaded him to become Secretary of Treasury. When he came back from that meeting with George Bush saying he was going to take the job, what did he say to you? And did you feel like you were ready to be the CEO of Goldman Sachs?
Look, I never felt like I was ready to be the CEO. I've been a CEO for 10 years. I'm not sure I feel ready to be the CEO of Goldman Sachs. But there was a conversation. We kind of knew he was being asked to be that job, and he came back and he talked to me. I wasn't hyperventilating to be CEO of Goldman Sachs. I was very comfortable with my job. I liked my place. It was, for the previous 15 years or more at Goldman Sachs, I was kind of in the last job I could be in. Other things opened up. But I reported to people and my contemporaries at the firm for a long time. I didn't think I was necessarily going to keep rising. Quirky things happened that made room for me. But he told me that he was, that he was offered this position. He planned to stay in the firm for a longer time, not take the job. And there was still a possibility that, when he did the math, that by the time he was ready to leave at a certain age, I'd still be young enough to get. And I said, that's fine. It's not like I'm waiting for you to leave your table at a buffet so I could take your seat. It was fine. But notwithstanding him saying that, I guess he got another call to go in, and he decided to take the job. No big surprise to me.
So you became the CEO.
I got the call from Hank over the weekend. Now, Hank is an intense guy, works 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. I did too. He said, I have to go down to Washington. I've decided to take it. They're going to be an announcement that Tuesday, the day after Memorial Day, in the Rose Garden, and I want you to fly down with me so we can discuss transition.
I'm pleased to announce that I will nominate Henry Paulson to be the Secretary of the Treasury.
Now, I was thinking, well, I really need to do this because I need to discuss the transition to me. Right. In his mind, he was discussing his transition to his next job. So I kept waiting to hear from him where the keys were buried and what was it, and, and all we were talking about was his transition, because his head was in another place as it should have been.
So he took the job, you got the job, and not too long thereafter, the U.S. economy kind of went south, I think it's fair to say.
I remember that.
Yes, and we went into the Great Recession. So when did you realize the U.S. economy was actually heading further south than anybody had thought it possibly could?
Don't forget, I was running a bank, and we were worried about the risk profile of the institution, what was going on. And to tell you the truth, in hindsight, everybody knows everything, and everybody remembers having known everything. Right. But in reality, every day that something was happening, it was just an incremental thing happening.
You and the other CEOs of major Wall Street banks were called down to Hank Paulson's office as Secretary of Treasury, and he said, we have a problem, and I'm going to give you each, or make you take, what, $25 or $50 billion to shore up your balance sheet. Was that something that you really wanted to do?
It's very hard to remember things and how you felt with after acquired information. I think I'm pretty good at it, because being a trading manager, you're always evaluating people's performance and trying to separate yourself from what you know that the person who made the decision couldn't have known, because otherwise you're a second guesser. So I do remember what I was thinking. I remember thinking at the time that this would make things safer, and I had an element of relief about it, because it was going to stabilize things. Was there a level of risk out there that I wouldn't have been comfortable? We spend money in our personal lives to insure ourselves against very remote risks. There was more than a remote risk at that point. Not a certainty, but certainly a non-remote risk that there would be a domino effect and that things would cave and it would spiral out of control. So the fact those things done, did we need to have it done? Not necessarily. But did we eliminate a risk that should not have been born? Okay. The answer is yes. The only thing we know is the world didn't spin out of control. I will just say, as a risk managing kind of person, I can't tell you that it needed to have been done. But people were going to sleep at night with much more risk than responsible people should have taken with the global economy.
People seem to blame Goldman for more of the sins of Wall Street than they blamed anybody else. Why do you think that was, and do you think it was fair?
I think there was a number of factors. One, you can't escape the first factor, which is that we were very involved in things. Obviously, for all the advice we give in a lot of areas, nobody at that point was asking us for advice on how to manage our public relations. We just were flat-footed. We've been an institutional firm our whole life. We didn't have a relationship with the American public. Another name for the public is consumers and taxpayers. Right. We didn't have a consumer business. we became, for a time, the symbol of the mortgage business, and we didn't originate mortgages. We bought mortgages from other firms, and to an extent, if you're buying mortgages from another firm, you're giving them cash to go out and do more mortgages, so we're an enabler of behavior. And the accusation was, and it was borne out by settlements where we, agreed to a set of facts where maybe, where we might not have done the due diligence on mortgages that we acquired and then on-sold to other people. So there's, behavior in there. So that's one factor, so we won't walk away from that. There was also the issue that we managed our risk pretty well in that crisis. And whereas a lot of firms out there lost 20, 40, $50 billion as firms and individuals got wiped out, we obviously didn't make money in the crisis, but we didn't lose money in the crisis. And so we came out relatively unscathed and looking like we needed to be punished by in other ways.
Goldman has now been much more involved in philanthropic activities than, at least visibly, it was before. You've got the program 10,000 Women, 10,000 Small Businesses. Is this a response to some of the image issues?
I would say historically, Goldman Sachs has been very philanthropic throughout our lives. When I became a partner of Goldman Sachs, I was taken aside. They said, when you run your life, and at the end of your life, somebody writes an obituary about you, if there are 9 paragraphs, no more than 3 should talk about Goldman Sachs. So you should have a more diverse life. You should do things after Goldman, like public service. I would say, in general, we never publicized what we did anywhere. You never saw Goldman Sachs commercials or advertisements or even our name on our building. After the crisis, we realized that one of the things we didn't do is we didn't communicate enough with the public to let them know who we were and what our contribution was to society. It wasn't really an emphasis to say, aha, we're entrepreneurial. We've never not been philanthropic. We've never not been.
Personally, you have been involved in a number of philanthropic things yourself, but in terms of public service, would you ever go in the government and follow your predecessors as Secretary-Treasurer or something like that?
I've been asked that question, and without hesitation, I said, I would like to be wanted to do that. I'd have to think about it. In this environment, I would say you won't argue with me on the point that I don't think an invitation is likely to come in the next. You
never know.
But you never know. So I'm not soliciting it, but it would be crazy. Other people would say, oh, gee, I wouldn't want to do that. Of course you'd want to make a contribution.
How do you define leadership, and what are the examples that you kind of have in your mind about what it takes to be a great leader?
I think different institutions, different cultures, different times require different things. I think through the crisis, you had to be optimistic, but not so optimistic that you lost credibility. You had to be willing to take a punch. You have to have a compass. You have to be, if not charismatic, you have to be at least articulate, because you have to explain to people and bring them along. You have to get people to behave well. I said in the crisis to people that, remember, act well now. I said this to my partners, because people are going to remember forever how you act at this critical time. So think about it, because we're going to get through this. And your reputation that you form this period of time will stay with you forever.
Did you go for a second and third opinion just to make sure?
My whole life is about risk management and due diligence and worrying about details. The peculiarity of my being a CEO of a public company was you really can't tell anybody until you tell everybody.
about a year or so ago, you were diagnosed with lymphoma. So how did you deal with that when you first learned the treatment was necessary? Did you think about stepping back from Goldman?
I started having some, what in hindsight were symptoms. At the time, they were just little problems that were easily explained in other ways. I had a cough, but end of summer allergies, I thought. I would have aches and pains a little bit when I exercised, but I'd never been this age before, so it's just something new. I started to lose weight, but I'm always trying to lose weight. I just thought I was unusually disciplined this time around. But when I collected all that stuff, I went in to see a doctor. First, saw nothing because they didn't even think to test me for what I had, prescribed allergy medicine, et cetera. And then a couple of weeks later, when it didn't go away, I took a full CAT scan, and then that lit up like a Christmas tree, and he called me up and told me I had lymphoma.
So when a doctor tells you you have lymphoma, does he say, well, we can treat it and there's no big problem, it's just a matter of treatment, or did he say, look, this could be life-threatening?
Well, it's life-threatening for sure. There's apparently over 70 different kinds of lymphoma, Hodgkin's, non-Hodgkin's, different kind of things. Each one carries with it its own risks. I had the more aggressive type, which is dangerous, more dangerous obviously because it's aggressive if you don't get cured. On the other hand, it's curable.
So you went in and you were in the hospital. I think sometimes you have to go in 3 or 4 days for chemo or something like that?
The treatment that I had was 6 3-week cycles. So for 3 weeks, 6 times on a cycle basis, the first 4.5 days of the cycle, about 98 hours or so, I'd be getting chemo night and day continuously.
Did you go for a second and third opinion just to make sure, or do you just say, I'm comfortable with the initial prescription?
You know, it's funny. I don't know. You don't know how to react to things until you live through them. But I didn't do. I mean, my whole life is about risk management and due diligence and worrying about details. And when this happened, it was so quick that I knew, as I said, when I had the CAT scan, I knew I had a lymphoma, but I didn't know what type. I had to have a biopsy, which is general surgery, and then it takes a week to figure out what you have, and then you go back and he reports to you. And the way these things work, and the peculiarity of my being a CEO of a public company was, you really can't tell anybody until you tell everybody.
Right.
And so my wife and I could tell nobody. I went and I did. So during this period of time, including up until on the way to the hospital to get the biopsy, I had a press thing scheduled, a televised thing with a lot of reporters in the audience. I went through, we did that whole thing, went into the hospital, had the biopsy, waited 5 days for the report. And on the way to get I went to get the results of the report, and the thing was so kind of advanced, and it was so, at that point, mandated what the treatment would be. I literally went upstairs from the doctor who delivered the results to me, right upstairs to, strap on the first of the chemo treatments. And so I did not get a second opinion.
Okay, all right. So after the treatment's now been completed, is that right?
Yes.
Now that you have had this, you are in remission.
Right.
So that means that you're always subject to being hurt again in some way, but generally you're in pretty good health now.
Worried that things come back. In fact, I should have been worried before I knew I had a problem at all. I should have been worried that I'd get it for the first time. Now I'm on edge because I'm worried about getting it for the second time. If I'd known better, I'd have been worried about getting it the first time.
But when you heard about the prescription, or the description of what you had and the necessary medication, do you think maybe life will be different for me and maybe I should step down from CEO, smell the flowers a little bit more, or you didn't think about that?
I'm very, reality-based. Maybe I'm not that spiritual. I don't know. I just, got very focused. I got the news, again, the news of what type of lymphoma I went into the doctor and received. The news that I had a lymphoma, I got on the telephone.
Okay.
And people said, how jarring was that? And I say it in a kind of funny way to think about it, but to some extent it's true. I'm kind of a fatalist in some ways. I said every time I had ever gotten a physical and the doctor called up and said there was nothing wrong with me, I was like shocked. So finally somebody called me up and said something's wrong with me. I said, oh, par for the course.
Right. When I first met you, you did not have a beard. And then you grew a beard, and now obviously after your illness you've kept it. Is that a permanent addition to your face?
It shaved itself when I took when I had the chemo treatments, but it grew back. So it's a sign of, I wouldn't say victory, but it's a sign that at least I'm gaining.
Okay.
So so my wife, I think it was very symbolic. to allow the beer to reassert itself.
All right. Let me wrap up by just asking you about your legacy. What would you like ultimately when you do leave to be your legacy?
The limitation of my position, unlike you're a founder. I'm not a founder. Goldman Sachs was a great firm when I got here, and hopefully it'll be a great firm when I leave. And so what I want to contribute is I want to leave the firm at least as good, but let me be more ambitious. Stronger than it was when I found it, more influential, important, but given what we've had to work our way through, I'd like to leave the firm also viewed as important and a positive influence on the American economy and culture. And so, we still have some work left to do.
Market experts are saying inflation is right around the corner. So ask yourself, where will gas and food prices be 3 months from now? Even the thought of inflation will lead to higher mortgage rates. So why take a chance? Grab a cash call mortgage 15-year fixed rate at 2.75 rate and APR with absolutely no closing costs. That's 2.75. Do it now before rates and everything else goes up. And with cash available in the twos, maybe pull cash out to pay off high-rate debt or just keep for that rainy day. Call 855-890-CASH.
My job is to manage and grow businesses, and I've never seen a rocket ship take off like this.
I'm Lindsay. I'm the founder of Easy Peasy. My accountant, he's almost like my dad in this weird way.
Hey, I'm proud of you. You actually did some of the things I asked you to do the other day. I've been able to say, okay, here's the challenges you're going to have, and we can get it confirmed through our QuickBooks. And what steps are we going to use to beat these obstacles before they really become a problem?
Get 30 days free at QuickBooks.com.
5-word message today. You may be under budget and ahead of schedule, but you're a little over your word count. On the show tonight, a schoolyard fist fight, a Florida forensic, and Hillary Clinton's message finale. But first, with less than 2 weeks before the election, Donald Trump did what every underdog presidential candidate would do in his position: attend a hotel ribbon cutting with his family here in Washington, D.C. There has been some head scratching in the media over this move, with critics accusing Trump of foolishly taking time away from his campaign to promote his business interests. His team says it's a perfect example of his management and his leadership ability. For his part, Trump gave what some are calling one of the best and most focused speeches of his entire campaign, in which he touted his hotel and in his signature line of the speech said the project was finished under budget and ahead of schedule, and promised to bring that kind of ethic to Washington. After the event, in an interview for The Circus, our Showtime documentary series produced in conjunction with Bloomberg Politics, I asked Trump about what was for him a very personal speech today.
I was just trying to say that we built a great building. We took it out of the doldrums, one of the great structures in the country, and we built it under budget and ahead of schedule. And to me, that was very important, Mark, because our country is so, we can't build a highway, we can't build a bridge, we can't fix a tunnel. You know, we're in such trouble. So, you know, I'm very happy with the way it's all worked out. But this building has turned out to be so amazing.
But how does the building connect to your presidential aspirations and your qualifications?
Under budget, ahead of schedule. It's very simple. You know, you look at what's going on. We owe $20 trillion. And that was really... Now, also I wanted to come and stop, and it takes an hour and a half, and we do it. But what it really says is you can do things under budget and great work. This will be one of the great hotels of the world. Under budget, ahead of schedule. Our country has to do things under budget and ahead of schedule.
We'll have more of that interview from Showtime's The Circus later in the program. After our talk, Trump went back out on the campaign trail to the battleground state of North Carolina this afternoon. John, was going to this hotel opening a distraction, or was it a smart political move?
Well, I would say, Mark, that if Donald Trump had spent this entire campaign talking about his prowess as a builder and creating a message architecture around that, this event today would have been on message and potentially effective in making the argument that he was making today. As it happens, it seems random and was kind of tailor-made to generate the kind of news coverage that it's generated, where people look at it and say, this is Donald Trump looking past Election Day and focused on his business interests and not on spending his valuable time in the battleground states he needs to win the presidency.
As is often the case, the campaign didn't lay enough groundwork. They think the press is hostile to them, but they didn't do a good job in advance explaining it. I thought it really was one of the best speeches he's given. It was thematic. He was calm and optimistic about the future of America, was not particularly negative about Hillary Clinton. I don't know if he'll give the speech ever again, but if he'd given a version of this at the convention, and had driven that message into the fall, I think he'd be doing better, at least in terms of message and in terms of style. It was one of the most natural and kind of heartfelt seeming speeches I've heard him give. But getting off the campaign trail, I think people are making way too much of it. People go all the time, candidates do, including in the last week, to give big focused speeches in places like New York and Chicago. Washington, with this hotel that he's very proud of, that does represent an accomplishment for him. Makes sense to me.
Well, again, I would say maybe candidates do get off the campaign trail and go give big focus speeches. They usually do it in May or June or July. They don't usually do it in the last 2 weeks, especially when they're behind in virtually every battleground state across the country where he needs to move votes. I just think, look, like so many Trump speeches, I think we're saying essentially the same thing here. Like, he gave the speech the other day on ethics reform before the third debate. If he'd started giving that speech in May and given it in a consistent, disciplined way for 6 months, he'd be in a better position than he is now. But he didn't, and so he's not. Same with this speech.
Yeah, definitely too little and too late to be a game-changing speech, but a very well-written speech and well-delivered, which isn't often the case for Donald Trump.
You can say that again. All right, Joe Biden and Donald Trump have been engaged in some spirited mano-a-mano, towel-snapping trash talk. It started on Friday while the vice president was campaigning in Pennsylvania, and over the past few days, well, see for yourself.
The press always asks me, don't I wish I were debating him? No, I wish we were in high school. I could take him behind the gym. That's what I wish. I'll get myself in trouble and say something like I'd like to take him behind the gym if I were in high school. I want to make it clear. I understand what assault is. I'm not in high school. If I were in high school, I used to have a temper in high school. I don't have a temper anymore. Nothing ever bothers me. Look, folks, no.
Did you see where Biden wants to take me to the back of the barn? Me. He wants it. I'd love that. I'd love that. Mr. Tough Guy.
The point I was making is he is trying to dumb down. He's insulting everybody in the neighborhoods I come from and the people who play ball. And that was the point I was trying to make. This is just absolutely unacceptable behavior, period.
So, Mark, Joe Biden started this fight, and he keeps stoking it. Finally got Trump to respond yesterday, so he's still on it. So what's Joe Biden's game here?
I think it's 50% like Elizabeth Warren, like Hillary Clinton to some extent. He likes getting under Trump's skin and provoking Trump and trying to put the focus on Trump. But I think it's 50% Joe Biden doesn't back down. And having made the first remark probably off the top of his head, he's just not inclined to back down, particularly that after Trump basically came back at him.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, there's no doubt that for a Democratic side that has wanted to paint Trump with the brush of not temperamentally fit to be president, they're always trying to provoke him and push him and get him to lash out in some way to keep making their point that he shouldn't be in the Oval Office. But I agree with you. You know, we talked to Biden about this a little bit when we were with him after he brought it up the second time in Toledo on Monday. And I got some sense that, you know, the truth is that really the part of the reason Joe Biden keeps saying this is because he'd really like to kick Donald Trump's butt.
Yeah. And also, look, this is the most direct engagement. He's been a critic of Trump, but is one of the few times, maybe the only time, Trump's responded to him directly. And I think we all know that Joe Biden would like to go out here and end this cycle as a big player, and this gets him in colloquy with the Republican nominee.
Right. That's a huge thing, right? I mean, Biden, the reality is that he's out there doing yeoman's work on the campaign trail, arguing the case for Hillary Clinton, arguing the case for down-ballot Democrats, but often in front of relatively small crowds, lusty crowds, but small crowds. This put him squarely in the national news narrative this week, and that is where Joe Biden loves to be, especially in the closing 2 weeks of a campaign.
And it does, for Biden watchers, whet the appetite for what might have been, had Biden been the Democratic nominee. The back and forth between Donald Trump and Joe Biden would have been quite something. Donnybrook. Yeah. All right. There's some new polls out today, like every day. A Suffolk University national survey shows Hillary Clinton leading Donald Trump by 9 points amongst likely voters. That's the exact same margin that another poll from NBC News, The Wall Street Journal, and Marist has Clinton up by in New Hampshire, while they have the two candidates tied in Nevada. But the most important poll of the day, if we do say so ourselves, is a brand new Bloomberg Politics poll of likely voters in Florida. Despite Trump's national dip, the race has been tightening in the Sunshine State. Our survey shows it is razor thin, with Trump leading Clinton by 2 points amongst likely voters, 45 to 43%, with the other when other candidates are factored in the race. In the two-person race, Trump's margin is just 1%, of course, both within the margin of error. The two candidates are deadlocked in our survey with independents. That's a group that Barack Obama won in Florida in 2012. Clinton leads amongst early voters. She's also ahead amongst Hispanic voters, 51 to 36%. That is, though, a smaller margin amongst Hispanics than some other polls have elsewhere in the country, in part, of course, because Hispanics in Florida include Cuban Americans, who are a long-time Republican-leading bloc. Clinton is campaigning today in the Sunshine State, where there's evidence that her team has the edge in the ground game. John, at the moment, given our poll and other factors, who would you give the upper hand to in Florida?
Let me just say, Mark, that we have a little bit of breaking news right now on the polling front, which is that there's a new AP poll that in a four-way race has Hillary Clinton up by 14 points nationally, 51 to 37. So let's throw that onto the polling bonfire here and take that into account. But focusing just on Florida, I think the race is going to be very close in Florida. I think that the Democrats Hillary Clinton continues to have a small advantage there because of the nature of demographic change in Florida, because of the superior ground game that the Democrats have there, because of the early vote. I think that that they have a small advantage still. But the trend line there would be worrying for me if I was Hillary Clinton. The race just keeps getting tighter and tighter in Florida, and if she doesn't turn that around, she might just lose that state.
Yeah, you'd have to say, again, given all this national data, that Hillary Clinton would still be the mild favorite there. Yep. But there are two things that cause me to think Trump could well win Florida. One is Rick Scott is the governor, and Rick Scott getting elected governor there shows you a conservative business person, outsider, is somebody who appeals to Florida voters. The other is every time I've gone to the state, in all parts of the state outside of South Florida, I sense intense enthusiasm for Trump and less for Hillary Clinton. And it's such a mega state. As strong as the Clinton ground game is, as well organized it is, it's just simply hard to organize a state that big.
Yeah, there's no question about that, except for, you know, I think we're going to see in the early votes she's going to do well there. Look, I think it's really, this is one of the states that I think is kind of pretty close to a pure toss-up state. I still, for the reasons we just said, that 14-point lead in that AP poll, man, another big national polling lead for Hillary Clinton. Yeah. Incredible. All right, now for a message from Hillary Clinton.
Far too many families today don't earn what they need and don't have the opportunities they deserve. I believe families deserve quality education for their kids, childcare they can trust and afford, equal pay for women, and jobs they can really live on. People ask me, what'll be different if I'm president? Well, kids and families have been the passion of my life, and they will be the heart of my presidency.
That was one of 2 new ads that the Clinton campaign put out today, outlining her closing arguments at the end of this long and arduous presidential race. Here is the other ad.
Our children, they look up to us, what we value, how we treat others. And now they're looking to see what kind of leaders we choose, who will entrust our country and their future to. Will it be the one respected around the world, or the one who frightens our allies and emboldens our enemies? The one with a deep understanding of the challenges we face, or the one who is unprepared for them? A steady hand or a loose cannon?
All right, Mark, we heard Donald Trump's closing argument in Gettysburg last weekend, which, of course, was overshadowed by Trump's threat to sue all the women who have accused him of sexual assault. But my question for you is, how well do you think these Clinton ads will translate into her closing argument message in these final 2 weeks of the campaign?
You know, a lot of Hillary Clinton's ads during the nomination fight against Bernie Sanders were not given high marks, but I think the general election ads have been relatively good. I think these are 2 pretty strong ads, and as a lot of campaigns do, that she's trying to close on a more positive message, a more unifying message, a softer message. And I think these are pretty solid to turn out the kind of voters she'll need to keep the lead that she's got right now.
I agree with that 100%, and they are closing on they're closing on 2 tracks, basically 2 ads, 2 tracks. One ad that's about the real lives of real people, and one ad that's basically a negative ad against Donald Trump. The scary faces that Trump's making, it looked almost like he was doing making kind of an unpleasant salute there with his hand in one that kind of will conjure some negative images for people. I think that those ads together make effective 1-2 punch, and they have a lot of money behind them. We know that ads don't matter that much in general election, but they have a lot of money behind them. Donald Trump has shut down his fundraising operations. I think that if she takes the arguments from those ads and makes them effectively on the stump, that's a good way to end the campaign for her.
Yeah, we still don't know exactly how much Trump's going to put in and what the spending mix will be. And we also don't know with these ads just how much they'll run both of them. The campaigns can claim they're going to run them equally, whatever. They can change it up. So we just don't know. But in terms of content, those are two very strong spots.
Yep.
All right, up next, we'll go back and show you more of my interview from here in Washington, D.C. today with Donald J. Trump right after this. Back here in our nation's capital, where earlier today I covered Donald Trump's hotel ribbon cutting in the old post office building on Pennsylvania Avenue, the brand new Trump International Hotel. In an interview for The Circus, our Showtime documentary series, produced in conjunction with Bloomberg Politics, I spoke to Trump after the event, and I asked him about what his opponents have been saying about his new building.
We'd be surprised to hear that Hillary Clinton's already criticized the hotel.
I wouldn't be surprised.
She said it's a new luxury hotel, but it's the same old story. Relied on undocumented workers to make his project cheaper, products from other countries. He even sued to make his taxes lower.
So just let me say, we had no undocumented workers. A false report was written that they found a couple out of the thousands of people that built it. We had no undocumented workers building this hotel. And in fact, we used E-Verify. For every single worker was E-Verify. And a newspaper came over and looked and said, oh, I think that person's undocumented. This was an E-Verify building. Every single worker was documented and perfected.
Are there foreign products in the building?
That I don't know. I mean, I would like to make it so there weren't, but unfortunately this country doesn't make things anymore. You know, if you look, our country doesn't make things anymore. Things you buy, whether it's look at a Carrier air conditioner, just moved to Mexico. China, Mexico, Germany, they're making all of our product. This is one of the reasons I'm running, because I know how to turn it around. I mean, the problem we have when you build something like this, so much of the bidding has to go to other countries because we don't make product anymore. Television sets. I would love to buy television sets made in the United States, but they're all made in South Korea and in Japan.
I want to ask you about the polls, but first, one more about the speech. Did it feel differently to you? People are reacting like this is a different tone, a different way of talking about your candidacy. Did it feel different?
Well, it didn't really. I mean, it's different. When I'm speaking in front of 25,000 people, like last night, right. We had an amazing crowd. We have amazing crowds all over. I mean, you know that. We have maximum crowds, but last night we had 25,000, and we had 15,000 that couldn't get in. And you know the reason they told me why they couldn't let them in? Stampede.
But people who say this was a great Trump speech, as far as you're concerned,
they're
all
that
great?
They say that. No, I think they're different. But that speech wouldn't be well received if I'm in front of 25,000 people with the spirit to make America great again. But that speech for the opening of a great hotel that employs a lot of people, et cetera, I think that speech was appropriate.
You've redefined how candidates talk about polls. Some polls now you're winning, some you're behind. We've got a new poll where you're up in Florida.
Yeah.
What's your general sense of where you are in the battleground states? Florida, Iowa, Ohio?
I think we're winning Iowa. I think we're winning Ohio. So do you. I think we're winning Florida. I think we're winning Florida actually by much more than your poll says. You have us 2 points up. I think we're going to do fantastically in Pennsylvania. I think we're winning North Carolina. I think we will soon be winning New Hampshire. We're going up there.
New poll today shows you closer.
Very close. I think as soon, when I go there, people see, look, it's jobs. It's fix our military. It's take care of our vets. It's don't let the world take advantage of us. I mean, I don't know if I'm a great messenger, but the message is absolutely the right message.
So you're going to get 270-something electoral votes?
I think we're going to win. Yeah, I think we're going to win.
WikiLeaks, I know you and your campaign have said the press isn't covering enough. What do you want the American people to know about the message out of those? They're not Hillary Clinton's emails, but what does it say about her?
Well, WikiLeaks shows how crooked the whole thing is. I mean, it shows how unbelievably dishonest the whole thing is. And you know what else it shows? I don't know John Podesta, but he says terrible things about Hillary Clinton when he says she has bad instincts. I mean, honestly, I wouldn't want anybody talking about me the way he talks about her. He comes out strongly that she has bad instincts and she doesn't know what she's doing.
Do you think your team's ever written emails to each other about you?
I hope not. But, between Bernie Sanders with bad judgment, he says she has bad judgment. But when I look at an email sent by John Podesta that Hillary Clinton, who he works for, has bad instincts, that's a terrible thing to say. By the way, I don't want my president to have bad instincts, that I can tell you.
All right, dial up some room service or something, because we're going to have more of my conversation with Donald Trump right after this. Welcome back. I'm in Washington, D.C., where earlier today I interviewed Donald Trump. Here is part 2 of that discussion at his new hotel here in the nation's capital.
Are you a little under the weather?
No.
You're feeling good.
I feel great.
You're closing strong, you think.
Hey, look, I made 8 stops yesterday. I'm doing 5 or 6
I never met
today.
a presidential candidate who didn't get sick.
Well, so far I haven't. Don't talk about it, okay? Don't put it in my head.
Your top communications aide
So
has
far I
gotten
have
sick.
not. Well, that's not me. We're going to win. I really believe. And by the way, I wouldn't say it. I really believe it.
If you thought you were going to lose, you tell us you thought you were going to lose.
I would say that we will try to win.
Try to win.
There's a big difference. We will try. But we are going to win. And if you look at state by state, hey, look, you're the first one that came out today. Florida, we're up. And believe me, that number is a low number. I really believe it.
And you're not worried about Arizona, Utah, Georgia?
I think Arizona is going to be great. Look, Obamacare is going up over 100% in Arizona. Who in Arizona, and I want strong borders, which they want, because they're having tremendous crime problems and tremendous...
But the polls have gotten closer there.
Sure, it's closer, and I have a third-party person running, too, which doesn't exactly help me. I mean, without that, would win in a walk. But Arizona, I've done great in Arizona. I think we're going to have a very big victory in Arizona. We're going to have strong borders, and we are going to terminate Obamacare. You have to terminate. It's a disaster. Arizona, just about higher than anybody else. They're going to be over 100% increase. Hillary Clinton wants to keep it. She wants to make it even more expensive. We're going to win Arizona. And don't forget, we're also going to be doing a massive tax cut. She's going to raise taxes. I'm going to lower taxes.
You were criticized yesterday for not necessarily explaining how health care works well enough. Do you want to revise and extend?
No, I don't want to revise because they were asking me about Obamacare, and I said Obamacare is a disaster. I wasn't referring to Doral.
Right. Where you have private coverage.
No, I have so many people. I have so many different. I have companies with Obamacare. I have contractors with Obamacare. Right. Those people are suffering. But I wasn't referring to the people at Doral. And in fact, I didn't bring them out to talk about Obamacare or health care. I just brought them out to show what a great place that is. But Obamacare, people are suffering with Obamacare. Number one, it doesn't work. Number two, it's so expensive that they can't afford it. And number three, it's closing up businesses.
You're going back to a battleground state right now?
Yeah, I'm going back to North Carolina right now.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you.
So, Mark, I have a question for you. You know, I watched both segments of the interview. Well done. What's Trump's body language like right now? I mean, a lot of people looked at what he's doing and have seen him in the last few days and think that he must kind of understand that he's losing, kind of slipping into defeatism, lashing out. He seemed pretty calm in that interview to me.
He did. He was, and in the event itself, as I said, he seemed to have almost a confidence, not a bragging confidence, but a quiet confidence. There's no doubt that his team knows he's behind, and behind nationally by more than they acknowledge. But as we discussed yesterday, you know, hope springs eternal with every behind candidate we've ever covered if you can see your way to 270 electoral votes. And right now, he's got a poll today from New Hampshire showing it closer. They've always been a little bullish on that one district in Maine. So I think, obviously, the data wouldn't give him as much confidence as he claims to have. But he did not seem to be anything today but comfortable with where he was and eager to get back out. But as I said, we've seen that with plenty of candidates we've covered when the data was like this.
Yeah, I mean, I would be a little bit, if I were him, I would be taking a deep breath looking at the fact that I have to have my running mate in Utah this close to Election Day if I were a Republican. But nonetheless, I'm struck by his calm today. I've not seen him that calm, it feels like, in months.
Yeah, he was both calm and kind of fired up. It was interesting, and like I said, every behind candidate does that. All right, so more of our interview with Donald Trump is going to air this Sunday night on The Circus on Showtime. You won't want to miss that, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. That's it for tonight. Thanks for watching. Bloomberg Markets Asia is up next. Sayonara.
It is 9 a.m. in Hong Kong, midday in Sydney, 9 p.m. in New York. I'm Heidi Lun, coming to you from Bloomberg's Asia headquarters here in Hong Kong. This is Bloomberg's Markets Asia. Samsung third quarter profit falls but still beats estimates after the Note 7 smartphone debacle. Bank of China managed to eke out a small profit, but the outlook for the big players remains pretty gloomy. And Australia's third largest bank beating estimates despite lenders facing higher costs, lower margins and rising bad loan charges. And a warning for Tata. Its ousted chairman claims wrongful dismissal and Zeza Group faces $18 billion in write-downs. All right, let's take a look at how this Asian trading day is shaping up. We've got a big week of earnings, particularly when it comes to the Chinese session. Of course, Bank of China reporting early on, managing to just come out with a slight profit, so not breaking that profit streak, but a lot of concerns over bad loans, as well as just a mounting pile of debt when it comes to the Chinese banking system. We'll take a look at how they trade when trading begins in Shanghai and Shenzhen and Hong Kong. But in the meantime, we've got Southeast Asia, Singapore coming online, Taiwan and Malaysia as well, starting trading. Let's get over to David to see how it's looking. Dave?
Right. I mean, how do you... I think when we talk about the banks, how do you find a balance between profit growth, realizing, of course, or planning for future bad debt? I think that's just another way of basically provisioning. And, you know, and this sort of interest rate environment where net interest margin, we saw that from OCBC earlier, not the most ideal spreads, if you will. So just something to keep in mind as we look forward, of course, to more bank earnings out of China. Equity markets, not very interesting, if I'm being honest. Volumes are quite low. I think that's what you get when you have a lot of macro risk further down the road. Traders are reacting to earnings here and there. So you're basically getting a checkerboard, if you will, across Asia-Pacific markets. And you have several markets, of course, like South Korea, which was sold off quite heavily yesterday, seeing a little bit. But you have Samsung, of course, also in the mix, heavily weighted stock, a little bit under pressure given earnings there as well. So let me just flip my pages here because there's really nothing much to say when it comes to the equity markets. Currencies, though, there's a little bit more consistency when you have the U.S. dollar still pushing up. So a good example, have a look at the ringgit right now, down about 0.8%, or well, 0.4% on dollar ringgit on the way up here against the U.S. dollar. 4.17 is your level. The other currency that's also pushing to the downside is sterling. Have a look at that. Fifth of 1%, 122.25. You look across other majors as well. Not a lot, but there is some weakness coming through for the euro. There we go. 109.04. Aussie dollar. Big pop, of course, up 77 cents, just a little bit lower there as well. Now, let me just, where's my oil contract here? I just want to mention something on oil because this is something you're going to want to watch closely. So have a look at Brent prices, 49.94, fell below 50. Now, there is a signal, if we could look at, well, get into my Bloomberg right now because I have a chart ready there. And what this essentially shows you, we're calling it the secret signal of oil. So what this measures is the spread between these different contracts, say of Brent crude, so time contracts, or the time spread, if you will. And what this one measures exactly is the spread between the price of the December contract and what you have for next June. And essentially what it shows you is that further down the road, or contracts further down, are much more expensive this time around. So there's an incentive that's being created to sit and store oil instead of sell it. So that's just something you want to watch. You run that function, then you get that chart. Guys, Heidi.
All right, thanks, Dave. We've got some breaking news crossing the Bloomberg out of South Korea. The country's second largest car maker, Kia Motors, is out with its third quarter results, and this is what we're looking at. Third quarter consolidated sales of 12.7 trillion won. Third quarter consolidated operating profit at 524.7 billion won. Their operating profit coming through just shy of expectations, 525 billion won. We were looking for 550.7 billion won there. their net profit consolidated coming in at 664.4 billion won. Taking a look at whether we're seeing much of a reaction when it comes to that share price at the moment. We'll see if we can bring that up for you. But this is South Korea's second largest automaker. It shares these car platforms with Hyundai Motors in terms of getting some of those costs down, and it has quite a significant exposure in China and Europe, the two largest markets. So we'll try and get a breakdown, I guess, of the geography of those earnings when they become available. All right, in the meantime, let's go over to Sydney, where Paul has the first word news for us. Paul.
Thanks, Heidi. Nintendo shares are paring some losses after it cut full-year revenue and operating profit forecasts. The success of Pokemon Go failed to offset sliding gains of its gaming platforms. Nintendo sees operating profit for the year through March of $288 million. That's one-third below previous estimates. Investors were also rather underwhelmed by last week's launch of the Switch console. Tesla jumped after hours following its first profit in 8 quarters. Net income in the last period was 71 cents a share, compared with a loss of 58 cents a year earlier. A Bloomberg survey estimated an average loss of 54 cents a share. Tesla says it's cut its borrowing facilities by almost $180 million, and its giant battery factory is on track to produce power cells this year. South Korea's Naver Corp narrowly missed estimates in the third quarter. Operating profit came in at the equivalent of $249 million, just below the forecast $252 million. Naver's line messaging service is popular in Japan, but it also missed estimates. Operating profit was $47 million through September, less than the $49 million analysts had been expecting. Sales also fell short. Singapore's OCBC says third quarter profit rose 5%, driven by income from wealth management and life insurance. Profit for Southeast Asia's second largest lender was 943 million Singapore dollars, about 678 million US. Income from wealth management jumped 34% from a year earlier. However, its non-performing loan ratio climbed by a third to 1.2%. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,600 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Paul Allen. This is Bloomberg.